The millionaire shouted, "Get out!" in front of his entire family. She walked away, silently, heartbroken. Months later, his family arrived at her door with tears, gifts, and apologies. But her security didn't even let them step inside. This is where the real story begins. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to your own family channel, Mr. Peter's Stories. May the Almighty bless every woman with endless grace, unshakable strength, and a heart that spreads warmth to everyone around her. May your homes be filled with laughter, your hearts with joy, and your days with blessings that never end. May every woman feel valued, honored, and deeply loved, for you are the pillars that hold the world together. My precious family, your presence means everything. Let your love and unity shine through every small gesture, and may we rise together stronger than ever before. Let this family be a sanctuary of respect, care, and unwavering support for one another. If your heart is true, like the video, if your love is real, write, "I am with Mr. Peter." Some moments arrive dressed as celebrations, but leave wearing the face of devastation. Brianna Scurry stood in the marble entryway of the Claver Winter estate, her fingers trembling against the silk of the dress Jake had bought her. The fabric whispered against her skin like a promise about to shatter. She had rehearsed this moment for weeks, imagining how she would tell him about the life growing inside her, how his face would transform from surprise to joy, how they would figure out their future together, despite the secrecy that had defined their relationship for 3 years. The chandelier overhead caught the late afternoon light, scattering diamonds across walls that cost more than most people earned in lifetimes. Brianna had cleaned these walls once, years ago, standing beside her mother, who scrubbed and polished until her hands bled. Back then, she had been invisible. Today, she was about to become unforgettable. "Jake, I need to talk to you before they all arrive," she said, reaching for his hand. He pulled away, his attention fixed on the grand staircase where voices echoed down like judgment descending from heaven. His jaw tightened in that way she had learned, meant he was preparing to become someone else, someone smaller than the man who whispered promises in the darkness of her apartment across town. "They're already here," he said. Mother insisted on coming early. The double doors to the west wing swept open, and Loretta Claver entered like winter itself, taking human form. She wore white, head to toe, as though purity could be purchased and displayed. Behind her came the rest of them, Whitley, with her practiced smile that never reached her eyes, Donovan carrying the weight of being the oldest son, like a crown he resented, Grandmother Constance, moving slowly, but with the authority of someone who had built empires through strategic cruelty, and Cousin Pierce trailing behind, already smirking at whatever entertainment he anticipated from this gathering. Brianna watched them arrange themselves in the entryway, a formation that spoke of family unity and shared purpose. She was not part of that formation. She stood apart, clutching a secret that suddenly felt like a weapon she wasn't sure how to use. "So," Loretta said, her voice cutting through the space between them like a blade through silk, "this is the girl. Not woman. Girl. Mother, this is Brianna. I wanted you all to meet her properly." Jake's voice carried an apology she didn't deserve to hear. "Oh, we know exactly who she is." Constance moved closer, her eyes sharp, despite the softness age had brought to her features. "You're Geneva's daughter. Geneva, who worked in our summer house. Geneva, who died scrubbing our floors while you were off getting ideas above your station." The words landed like stones in water, creating ripples that spread and spread until they touched everything. Brianna felt her breath catch, not from shame, but from the recognition that these people had known who she was all along. They had let Jake believe he was keeping a secret. When the only secret was theirs, they had been waiting for this moment to destroy her. "My mother was the finest woman I've ever known," Brianna said, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside her chest. "She worked herself to exhaustion, providing for me. She taught me dignity. She taught me strength. She taught me that people reveal their true character in how they treat those who can do nothing for them." "How poetic!" Whitley's laugh sounded like glass breaking in slow motion. "Tell me, did she teach you how to seduce her employer's son? Is that the dignity she passed down?" "Whitley, that's enough." Jake finally spoke up, but his voice carried no real authority, only the weakness of someone who knew he wouldn't follow through. "Is it, brother?" Donovan stepped forward, arms crossed over his chest. "Because I think we need to address what's actually happening here. This woman, whose mother we employed out of charity, has somehow convinced you that she belongs in our world. She's been your entertainment, Jake, that's all. Surely you understand that." Brianna wanted to scream that she carried his child, that she had given 3 years of her life to loving a man who hid her like a shameful secret, that she deserved more than being dismissed as entertainment. But the words stuck in her throat because a terrible realization was settling over her like ash after a fire. Jake wasn't going to defend her. He was going to choose them. "Mother, I care about Brianna. She's educated, she's accomplished, she's completely unsuitable." Loretta's interruption was absolute. "This family has maintained its position through careful choices across generations. We don't throw away our legacy for temporary infatuations with the Help's children. You've had your fun, Jake. Now it's time to remember who you are." The Help's children. That's all Brianna would ever be to them. Not a woman who graduated top of her class. Not someone who volunteered at shelters and read poetry and dreamed of making the world gentler. Just the daughter of a woman who cleaned their toilets. "Jake!" Brianna turned to face him fully, needing him to see her, really see her. "Tell them this isn't what they think. Tell them about us. About everything we've built together." He opened his mouth, and for one suspended moment, she believed he might find the courage buried somewhere beneath all those years of being molded into what his family required. His eyes met hers, and she saw something flicker there. Maybe love, maybe regret, maybe just the recognition of his own weakness. Then his grandmother spoke again, her voice carrying the weight of family history and expectation and money that stretched back generations. "We know about your grandmother, dear, the one who had several children by several different men. We know about your aunts who have been through multiple marriages. We know that instability runs in your bloodline like a genetic flaw. Did you really think we wouldn't investigate? Did you think you could infiltrate this family?" The cruelty was surgical, designed to cut where it would cause maximum damage. Brianna felt her face grow hot, not with shame for her family, but with rage at the casual way these people weaponized other people's struggles. "My grandmother raised 5 children alone after my grandfather died in a factory accident," Brianna said, her voice rising despite her attempt to stay calm. "My aunts survived domestic violence and rebuilt their lives with courage you couldn't comprehend. You speak about them like their pain is evidence of unworthiness, when the only thing it proves is that they survived circumstances you've never faced, because your money protected you from ever having to be that strong." Enough! Loretta's single word fell like a guillotine blade. She turned to Jake, her expression shifting from disgust to something more dangerous, maternal authority wielded like a weapon. "You will end this, right now, in front of all of us, so there can be no confusion about where your loyalties lie. You will tell this girl that she is not welcome in our family, in our home, or in your life. You will do this now, or you will find yourself explaining to the board of directors why you're no longer fit to inherit your position at the company." Brianna watched. Jake's face cycled through emotions so quickly she couldn't name them all. She saw him weighing his choices, calculating what mattered more, his inheritance or the woman carrying his child. The fact that it took him more than 2 seconds to decide told her everything she needed to know. "Brianna," he started, then stopped, started again. "This isn't. You have to understand that my family, your family or me, Jake, that's what this is." She heard the steel in her own voice and barely recognized it. "You can choose them or you can choose us, but I won't be hidden anymore. I won't be your secret shame. The silence that followed pressed down on them all like a physical force. Brianna could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the life growing inside her shifting as though sensing the danger in this moment. She placed her hand on her stomach without thinking, a gesture of protection, and watched Jake's eyes follow the movement without comprehension. Then he stepped back from her. That single movement said more than any words could. He stepped back, aligning himself with his family, choosing the safety of his inheritance over the risk of loving her. "Jake," she whispered, giving him one final chance. His face crumpled like paper being crushed in a fist. Then he straightened his spine, lifted his chin, and became someone she didn't recognize. "Get out!" The words exploded through the entryway, echoing off marble and crystal and all the expensive surfaces that meant more to him than she ever would. Jake Claver shouted those two words with his entire family watching, their expressions arranged in various degrees of satisfaction and vindication. Brianna didn't cry. She didn't plead. She didn't reveal the secret she now knew she would carry alone. She looked at each face in that hallway, Loretta with her cold triumph, Whitley with her smug superiority, Donovan with his dismissive contempt, Constance with her calculating cruelty, Pierce with his entertained grin. She memorized every detail of this moment, storing it somewhere deep where it would transform from pain into something else entirely. Then she walked toward the front door with her head high, her shoulders back, her dignity intact despite everything they had tried to strip from her. The marble floor clicked beneath her heels like a countdown to freedom. "Brianna, wait!" Jake's voice cracked behind her. She didn't turn around. She pulled open the heavy front door herself, stepped out into the winter evening, and let the cold air hit her face like a baptism. Behind her the door closed, with the finality of a coffin lid sealing shut. The Claver family thought they had dismissed her like they dismissed everyone who threatened their carefully constructed world. They had no idea they had just created something far more dangerous than a scorned woman. They had created a woman with nothing left to lose, and a daughter who would need to understand why her father's name would never be spoken in their home. Chapter 2, The Resurrection. Brianna learned to measure life in moments her daughter would never remember, but that would shape her forever. The apartment was small enough that Rooks's cries reached every corner simultaneously. Brianna walked the worn carpet at 3 a.m, her daughter pressed against her chest, humming songs her own mother had hummed while scrubbing other people's floors. The window overlooked a parking lot where streetlights flickered like uncertain promises. 3 states away from everything the Clavers represented. Your grandmother Geneva would have loved you, Brianna whispered into Rue's dark curls. She would have sung you to sleep and taught you that work is sacred when done with pride. Rue stopped crying long enough to stare up at her mother with eyes that carried Jake Claver's exact shade of hazel. Every time Brianna looked at her daughter, she saw the man who had destroyed her, standing beside the father her daughter would never know. The contradiction lived in those eyes, and Brianna had to make peace with loving one while hating the other. The birth certificate sat in a drawer with one line deliberately blank. Father, unknown. Not because Brianna didn't know, but because Jake Claver had forfeited his right to be known. She had gone through labor alone, her hand gripping the hospital bed rail, while nurses offered encouragement that couldn't fill the space where a partner should have stood. When they placed Rue on her chest, still slick with birth and screaming her arrival into the world, Brianna had made a vow more binding than any marriage. This child would never feel unwanted, would never question her worth, would never believe that being dismissed was a reflection of her value. 4 months had transformed Brianna in ways that went deeper than her postpartum body. She worked night shifts at a community hospital, caring for patients who reminded her that suffering didn't discriminate by income bracket. She saved every possible dollar, living on generic cereal and expired bread from the corner store's discount rack. During Rue's naps, She sat at the tiny kitchen table and wrote in leather-bound journals she'd purchased before her money ran desperately. Thin, the last remnant of a life where she could afford small luxuries. She wrote everything. Every conversation Jake had ever shared about his family. Every vulnerability Loretta had revealed during the handful of times Brianna had visited the estate as Jake's friend from school. Every complaint Donovan had voiced about shareholders and public perception. Every detail about Whitley's 3 aborted engagements and the reasons each wealthy suitor had walked away. Every story Constance had told about building the pharmaceutical fortune through aggressive acquisition and strategic silence around uncomfortable questions. Jake had talked endlessly during their time together, never imagining his pillow talk might someday matter. He had treated Brianna as a confidant, precisely because he believed she would never have the power or platform to repeat anything he said. He had been wrong about so many things. What are you writing? Her neighbor Celeste appeared in the doorway, holding the spare key Brianna had given her for emergencies. Sorry, your door was unlocked. I wanted to check on you both. Celeste was older, with silver hair she wore in long braids and a face that had seen enough hardship to recognize it in others. She had arrived at Brianna's door the second week with a casserole and an offer to watch Rue whenever needed, asking nothing in return except occasional company. In a world where Brianna had learned to trust no one, Celeste had become the exception. Just memories, Brianna said, closing the journal. Things I don't want to forget. Things you want to remember or things you're afraid will fade. Celeste settled into the second-hand chair that creaked under even slight weight. Both. Neither. I'm writing down what happened so Rue can understand someday. So she'll know her father wasn't a monster, just a coward. So she'll understand why his family remains strangers to her. Celeste nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful in that way that meant she was about to say something uncomfortable and true. You're also writing yourself out of victim and into survivor. I recognize the process. I did the same thing after my ex-husband tried to erase me through the courts and family pressure. Brianna felt something shift in her chest, recognition meeting recognition across the space between them. How did you stop being angry? Because who says I stopped? Anger is energy. The question is what you build with it. The words settled into Brianna's bones, like seeds finding soil. What would she build with her anger? More importantly, what would she build for Rue? She couldn't give her daughter Jake's money, or the Claver name, or the security that came from being born into dynasty. But she could give her something else, the story of a mother who refused to let powerful people write the ending. Rue stirred in her bassinet, making the small noises that preceded waking. Brianna went to her, lifting her daughter with the practiced ease of someone who had learned to do everything one-handed. Rue nuzzled against her, seeking milk and comfort and the only safety she had ever known. I've been thinking about something, Celeste said, her voice careful. You mentioned once that you used to work in communications before. Everything. My nephew runs a digital media company. They focus on investigative storytelling, long-form podcasts that examine how systems protect certain people while crushing others. He's looking for researchers who understand how wealthy families operate. I could introduce you if you're interested. Brianna's first instinct was to refuse. She had a newborn, no childcare beyond Celeste's sporadic help, and barely enough energy to shower regularly. The idea of taking on additional work felt impossible. But then she thought about those journals filling with Claver secrets. She thought about patterns she had started noticing as she wrote, how the family's public generosity masked private cruelty, how their charitable foundation seemed designed more for tax avoidance than actual good, how their pharmaceutical empire had quietly settled dozens of lawsuits that never reached public attention. She thought about all the ways the Clavers had made her feel powerless, and about Celeste's words, anger is energy. What's your nephew's name? Brianna asked. Tate Winslow. He's good people, treats his employees like humans instead of resources. His company is small but respected. They broke that story about the governor's wife using charity funds for personal expenses. He has integrity, which is rare in media. Brianna looked down at Rue, who was now wide awake and staring at her mother with that intense baby focus that seemed to see straight through into souls. Would he be interested in stories about pharmaceutical families who use charity as camouflage while their business practices destroy lives? Celeste's expression shifted into something sharp and knowing. Oh, honey, that's exactly the kind of story that company exists to tell. But you need to be certain before you start down this path. These kinds of people don't just accept exposure. They fight back with every resource they have. Let them fight, Brianna said, and felt the words solidify something inside her that had been forming since the moment Jake screamed at her to leave. I'm done being dismissed. I'm done being invisible. And I'm done letting them believe they won. Then I'll make the introduction. But Brianna? Celeste stood, moving toward the door. Whatever you're planning, make sure it's not just about revenge. Make sure it's about something bigger, something that matters beyond just hurting the people who hurt you. Otherwise, you'll lose yourself in the process. After Celeste left, Brianna sat in the pre-dawn darkness with her daughter, thinking about the difference between revenge and justice, between destruction and accountability. The Clavers had treated her as disposable because they believed they could. They had silenced her because they believed she had no voice worth hearing. They had erased her because they believed she lacked the resources to write herself back into existence. She opened her laptop, a battered machine she'd bought used, and composed an email to Tate Winslow. She didn't mention Jake specifically. She didn't reveal her personal connection. She simply pitched a story about how wealthy families maintain power through strategic image management, using pharmaceutical dynasties as a case study. She wrote with the precision of someone who had studied communications and the passion of someone who had lived the consequences of unchecked privilege. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. Rue fell back asleep in her arms, tiny fists curled against her mother's chest, completely unaware that her mother had just lit a match that would eventually burn down an empire. Brianna held her daughter and imagined a future where Rue would grow up knowing that being discarded wasn't an ending, but a beginning, that survival could transform into something magnificent, that women who were told to disappear could instead become unforgettable. The response from Tate Winslow arrived before sunrise. Let's talk. This sounds exactly like something we need to investigate. How soon can you meet? Brianna looked at the message, then at her sleeping daughter, then at the journals filled with secrets the Clavers never imagined would matter. She typed back, I can meet any time. I've already done most of the research. Chapter 3. The Voice. The studio was smaller than Brianna expected, tucked into a converted warehouse where exposed brick met soundproofing panels in an aesthetic that tried too hard to appear authentic. Tate Winslow sat across from her, his hands wrapped around a coffee mug that proclaimed, "The truth will piss you off." He had the look of someone who had given up on impressing anyone, glasses held together with tape, a shirt that had seen better decades, and the focused intensity of someone who cared more about substance than surface. So, he said, sliding a folder across the table between them, I've spent the past week researching pharmaceutical dynasties like you suggested. There are maybe 6 families in this country who fit the profile you outlined. Want to tell me which one you're actually talking about? Brianna had left Rue with Celeste, promising to return within 2 hours. Her breasts ached with milk, a physical reminder of the life she had created and the life she was rebuilding. She looked at the folder without touching it, then met Tate's gaze directly. Does it matter which specific family if the pattern holds across all of them? Name. It matters if you have inside information. It matters if this is personal. He leaned back, studying her. You wrote that pitch with the precision of someone who's seen the machinery from the inside. Either you worked for one of these families or you're connected to them somehow. I need to know what I'm dealing with before I commit company resources. What if I told you I could provide documentation about sealed lawsuits, internal family communications, and behavioral patterns that would take your team months to verify independently? Brianna kept her voice level. What if I told you I have access to information these families believe is safely buried? Then I'd ask what you want in exchange. A platform, an audience, a voice that can't be silenced by lawyers or money or reputation management firms. She pulled out her own folder, thinner than his but dense with copied documents and handwritten notes. I'm not looking for payment. I'm looking for partnership on something that matters more than profit. Tate opened her folder, his expression shifting as he read through the first few pages. She watched him absorb the details about settlement patterns, the connections between charitable donations and legislative votes, the way certain families positioned themselves as saviors while their business practices created the very problems they claimed to solve. This is remarkable, he said quietly. This is also dangerous. Families with this kind of power don't just accept exposure. They destroy people who threaten them. They already destroyed me. The words came out harder than Brianna intended. So let's talk about what we can build from the ruins. Over the next hour, they mapped out a vision that felt both audacious and necessary. A podcast series examining how legacy families maintain control across generations, using composite examples drawn from multiple dynasties to protect against immediate legal action while building toward something specific. The first season would establish patterns. The second would narrow focus. By the third, they would have built enough credibility and audience that direct accusations would land with the weight of established truth rather than unverified allegations. You'll need to host, Tate said. The stories need a consistent voice, someone who understands the emotional weight behind the facts. Anonymously, Brianna countered. At first, until we've established enough credibility that revealing my identity adds power instead of inviting dismissal. The witness, he said, trying the title out loud. Someone who saw the machinery from inside and lived to tell about it. They shook hands across the table, and Brianna felt something she hadn't experienced since that winter night at the Claver estate. The sensation of being seen as someone whose voice mattered, whose experience carried weight, whose story deserved to be heard. The first season of Legacy Lies launched 6 months later. Brianna recorded episodes during Rue's naps, her daughter sleeping in the next room, while her mother spoke truths into a microphone that would eventually reach millions. She discussed the psychology of inherited wealth, the way privilege insulated people from consequences, the patterns of how service workers got erased from family narratives. She never mentioned the Clavers by name, but anyone who knew their history would recognize echoes in every episode. The response exceeded every projection. Within weeks, the podcast climbed to the top of multiple charts. Comments poured in from listeners who saw their own experiences reflected. Domestic workers who had been treated as invisible. Women who had been dismissed by wealthy families they tried to join. People who had been crushed by systems designed to protect the powerful. Brianna read every comment, every story, every message from people who finally felt heard. She had thought this project was about the Clavers, about making them answer for how they treated her. But as the audience grew, she realized she had accidentally created something larger, a space where people who had been silenced found permission to speak. "Mama, loud," Rue complained one afternoon. Covering her ears during a recording session, Brianna stopped mid-sentence, pulling off her headphones. Her daughter had recently started talking, each new word arriving like a gift Brianna hadn't earned but cherished anyway. "Too loud, baby?" "Too loud," Rue confirmed, then toddled over to climb into her mother's lap, apparently forgiving the noise in exchange for proximity. Brianna held her daughter, breathing in the scent of baby shampoo and graham crackers, and felt the familiar guilt that accompanied every moment she spent building this platform instead of simply being Rue's mother. Was she doing this for her daughter's future? Or was she doing it for her own need to matter, to be more than the woman who got dismissed? "You're overthinking again," Celeste said from the doorway. She had become Brianna's full-time nanny as the podcast income grew, trading her own small apartment for a room in Brianna's slightly larger one, creating an unconventional family built on mutual need and genuine affection. "That look on your face means you're wondering if you're being selfish." "Am I?" Brianna asked, genuinely uncertain. "You're building something your daughter will inherit. You're teaching her that women don't have to accept being erased. That's not selfish. That's preparation." Celeste took Rue from Brianna's arms, giving the little girl a snack and heading toward the living area. "Finish your episode. The truth doesn't record itself." The second season focused specifically on pharmaceutical dynasties. Brianna interviewed family members of people who had become addicted to pain, medication prescribed too freely, pushed too aggressively, and marketed as safer than the evidence supported. She spoke with former employees who had been pressured to meet sales quotas despite knowing the drugs were being overprescribed. She documented the pattern of how these families donated to addiction treatment centers with one hand while lobbying against prescription controls with the other. She included enough verifiable public information that journalists began investigating, but she stopped just short of naming the Clavers directly. The strategy was working exactly as planned, building pressure, establishing credibility, creating a foundation that would make the eventual revelation impossible to ignore. Jake started listening to the podcast after Whitley sent him a link with a message. "This sounds weirdly familiar. Is this about us?" He listened to every episode twice, his stomach dropping further with each one. The stories were too specific, the details too accurate, the understanding of family dynamics too intimate. Someone who knew them was behind this. Someone who had been close enough to see the machinery from inside. His mother dismissed his concerns with the same cold certainty she applied to everything that threatened her carefully constructed world. "It's general allegations from someone seeking attention. We've done nothing wrong. Our lawyers have assured me we're protected." But Jake couldn't shake the feeling that protection was an illusion, that they had underestimated someone they shouldn't have, that consequences they had avoided for generations were finally approaching. Late one night, he searched for information about Brianna Scurry. He found nothing. No social media presence, no current address, no employment history that extended past their breakup. She had vanished completely, as though she had been erased from existence, or as though she had chosen to become invisible. He didn't connect her disappearance to the witness. Not yet. That revelation was still coming, still building toward the moment when everything he thought he knew would shatter completely. Brianna finished recording the season finale in her new home, a modest house in a gated community that podcast revenue had made possible. Rue played in a real nursery with actual furniture instead of second-hand pieces held together with hope. Celeste had her own bedroom with an attached bath. They had health insurance, reliable transportation, and the kind of security that came from earning your own resources instead of depending on someone else's generosity. "This is the last episode before we reveal everything," Tate said through her headphones. "You ready for what comes next?" Brianna looked at the framed photo on her desk, Rue blowing out candles on her second birthday cake, chocolate frosting smeared across her face, completely unaware that her mother was preparing to declare war on her father's entire family. "I've been ready since the moment they told me I was disposable," Brianna said into the microphone. "Let's show them what disposable women can build when you give us enough reason to rise." Chapter 4. The Reckoning Builds. The third season premiere dropped on a Tuesday morning, and by evening, 3 major news outlets had picked up the story. Brianna sat in her home office, monitoring social media, while Rue watched cartoons in the living room under Celeste's supervision. The numbers climbed faster than any previous release, 15 million downloads in the first week, trending globally, spawning countless reaction videos and analysis threads. But more than the numbers, it was the specific nature of the conversation that mattered. People were making connections. The family she describes operated in the Northeast. One viral thread began. They built their fortune on pain medication during the crisis everyone pretended wasn't happening. They've settled approximately 300 lawsuits through sealed proceedings. Only 2 pharmaceutical dynasties match that profile. Brianna refreshed the page, watching people narrow the possibilities, conducting their own investigations into which family the witness was exposing. She had given them enough breadcrumbs that the truth felt like discovery rather than accusation, making the revelation more powerful because the audience believed they had figured it out themselves. Her phone rang. Tate's name flashed on the screen. "The lawyers want to meet tomorrow," he said without preamble. "The Clavers legal team sent a letter threatening action if we don't issue a retraction and reveal your identity." Let them threaten. Brianna felt ice water replace the blood in her veins. "We haven't named them. We haven't made any claims that aren't supported by public records. They're threatening us because they recognize themselves in the mirror and they don't like what they see." That's what our lawyers said. "But Brianna, these people have resources we don't. They can drown us in litigation, even if they never win a case. They can make this expensive enough that we have to stop. Then we accelerate the timeline." She made the decision in the space between heartbeats. "Next episode, I reveal my identity. I tell my specific story. Once that's public, they can't pretend this is general allegations anymore." That's not the plan. We were going to build for another season before the plan changes. They're trying to silence me before I speak, which means they're afraid of what I'll say. Fear gives me leverage. We use it now. After she hung up, Brianna sat in the silence of her office, surrounded by evidence of the life she had built from nothing. She thought about that winter night, standing in the Claver entryway while they catalogued all the reasons she wasn't good enough. She thought about labor without Jake, about the terror of being solely responsible for another human life, about scraping together money for diapers while the father of her child lived in luxury he had inherited rather than earned. She thought about Rue asking, as she inevitably would, why she didn't have a daddy like other children. What would Brianna say? That her father was a coward who chose comfort over courage? That his family believed some people mattered more than others? That love, when tested by expectation and inheritance, had proven less valuable than maintaining appearances? "You look like you're planning to burn the world down," Celeste said, appearing in the doorway with Rue balanced on her hip. Just one family's empire. Brianna reached for her daughter, pulling her close. "Rue, baby, do you know how much Mama loves you?" This much." Rue spread her arms as wide as they could go, a gesture Brianna had taught her to represent infinite quantities. "That's right. This much and more. Everything Mama does is because she loves you this much." After Celeste took Rue for her afternoon routine, Brianna began writing the script for the episode that would change everything. She wrote about meeting Jake, about keeping their relationship secret at his insistence, about believing his promises that they would eventually go public. She wrote about that winter night, about standing in front of his family while they dismissed her as entertainment and contamination. She wrote about walking away pregnant and alone, about choosing to protect her daughter from people who would only damage her. She wrote until her hands cramped, until tears blurred her vision, until the story existed outside her body where it could finally do the work she needed it to do. The episode would release in 3 days. Jake listened to the announcement while sitting in his car outside the family estate. The witness had finally revealed that the next episode would include her identity and specific accusations against the family she had been exposing for 2 seasons. The online speculation had already narrowed to either the Clavers or the Thornhill family, both pharmaceutical dynasties with similar histories. He knew with absolute certainty that the witness was coming for his family specifically. He walked into the estate where Loretta had convened an emergency meeting with Donovan, Whitley, and their legal team. Grandmother Constance sat in her usual chair, looking older than he remembered, as though the weight of potential exposure was aging her in real time. "This is your fault," Whitley said the moment Jake entered the room. "You brought that girl into our lives. You gave her access to information she's now weaponizing against us. I haven't spoken to Brianna in years." Jake's voice sounded hollow even to himself. "I don't even know where she is." "Then hire someone who can find her." Donovan stood near the window, arms crossed, his expression carved from granite. "We need to know what she's planning to say so we can prepare a response." Or, their lawyer interjected, "we could consider reaching out through intermediaries to negotiate a settlement. If Miss Scurry wants financial compensation—" "She doesn't want money," Jake said quietly, realization settling over him like concrete hardening. "She wants what we took from her. She wants to matter. She wants to be heard. She wants everyone to know what we did to her. What we did." Loretta's voice could have frozen flames. "We protected our family from an opportunist who tried to infiltrate our legacy. We did nothing wrong." Jake looked at his mother, really looked at her, and saw someone who genuinely believed her own justifications. She had rewritten history in her mind until their cruelty became protection, their dismissal became wisdom, their destruction of another person became responsible family management. "We broke her," he said. "I broke her. And she's going to make sure the entire world knows it. Then we'll show the world that she's lying." Loretta stood, smoothing her skirt with hands that trembled slightly despite her controlled demeanor. "We'll provide testimony from everyone who was present that night. We'll demonstrate that she's a scorned woman seeking revenge through manufactured allegations." Except it's not manufactured. Jake felt something break loose inside him. Something that had been held in place by obligation and inheritance, and the desperate need for family approval. "Everything she's saying is true. We did settle those lawsuits. We did push medication we knew was being overprescribed. We did donate to treatment centers while lobbying against the very regulations that would have prevented the crisis. And we did treat her like she was disposable because she came from a background we considered beneath us." The silence following his words felt alive, dangerous like the moment before lightning strikes. "Get out," Loretta said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Get out of this house, and don't come back until you remember which side you're on." Jake walked toward the door, then turned back. "I've always known which side I was on. That's the problem. I chose your side when I should have chosen hers. And now we're all going to pay for that choice." He left the estate and drove aimlessly through the city, his mind replaying every moment with Brianna, searching for the exact instant when he could have been brave instead of broken. He passed the restaurant where they had their first dinner, the park where they had spent an afternoon pretending they were a normal couple without the weight of secrets and family expectations. The coffee shop where she told him she loved him and he had kissed her instead of saying it back, because words made things real in ways he wasn't ready to face. He had loved her. He had loved her and destroyed her anyway, because being a Claver meant more to him than being hers. The episode released early, breaking from the usual schedule. Brianna's voice, which 3 million regular listeners knew as the witness, now had a face, a name, a specific story that couldn't be dismissed as speculation or exaggeration. She told everything with the surgical precision of someone who had spent years preparing for this moment. She provided documentation, text messages, hospital records from Rue's birth showing no father listed, statements from people who had witnessed various Claver family behaviors over decades. She didn't position herself as a victim. She positioned herself as a witness, providing testimony about patterns of behavior that extended far beyond her personal experience. The episode ended with her saying, "I built my life and this platform not for revenge, but to ensure my daughter grows up in a world where people like the Clavers cannot simply erase people like us. This isn't about one family. This is about accountability for everyone who believes wealth makes them immune to consequences. Within 12 hours, the response was catastrophic for the Clavers. Their stock dropped, board members resigned, hospital contracts were suspended, and Jake, sitting alone in his apartment for the first time in his life, finally understood that Brianna hadn't destroyed them. They had destroyed themselves, and she had simply refused to disappear while they pretended it never happened. Chapter 5. The fortress security cameras became Brianna's new reality, positioned at every angle of the property she had purchased with money earned from speaking truths that made powerful people uncomfortable. Rue ran through the backyard chasing butterflies, her laughter piercing the spring air like music written specifically for moments of pure childhood joy. Celeste sat on the patio reading while keeping one eye on the child who had become as much hers as Brianna's, through the daily rituals of care and love that bound them into an unconventional family. She's getting faster, Celeste observed as Rue launched herself across the grass with the fearless confidence of someone who had never been taught to doubt her worth. Soon I won't be able to keep up. Then we'll get her a younger babysitter, Brianna said, coming outside with fresh lemonade. But we're keeping you forever, because Rue needs someone who teaches her that family isn't always defined by blood. Speaking of family, Celeste's tone shifted. Harlan called from the gate. Someone tried to get in this morning claiming to be your cousin. He sent them away, but he wanted you to know. Brianna's hands tightened around the pitcher. I don't have any cousins in this state. Description? Dane, white male, expensive car, claimed he was worried about you after all the publicity. Harlan said the worry looked more like curiosity about what kind of life you're living now. The media attention following her revelation had transformed Brianna's existence in ways both empowering and exhausting. Journalists wanted interviews. Publishers wanted book deals. Speaking agencies wanted to represent her for corporate events about overcoming adversity. She had declined most offers, accepting only those that aligned with the larger mission of holding powerful families accountable for behavior they had previously hidden behind charitable reputations and legal settlements. But with visibility came vulnerability. Jake's private investigator had found her address within a week of the episode release. She knew this because Harlan had caught the investigator taking photos of her home, had politely but firmly escorted him off the property, and had documented everything with the professional efficiency of someone who understood that threats from wealthy families required evidence and preparation. Mama, look! Rue came running over with a dandelion she had probably yanked from the earth with her entire root system attached. For you. It's beautiful, baby. Brianna accepted the weed flower and tucked it behind her ear, knowing it would wilt within minutes but treasuring the gesture that wouldn't last much longer. Soon, Rue would understand that dandelions weren't flowers, but something people tried to eliminate from perfectly manicured lawns, and the innocence of offering them as gifts would fade into the complicated awareness that some things were considered worthless by people who controlled the definitions. The intercom from the front gate crackled to life. Harlan's voice came through calm but alert. Mrs. Scurry, Jake Claver is at the gate requesting to speak with you. He's alone and unarmed, but I can send him away if you prefer. Brianna felt her heart rate spike, adrenaline flooding her system in response to a threat her body remembered, even if her mind had moved past it. She looked at Rue, who was now showing Celeste a beetle she had discovered, completely oblivious to the fact that her father stood less than 100 yards away, requesting access to a life he had forfeited. The right to enter. Tell him no. The words came out steady despite the chaos in her chest. Tell him that Ms. Scurry has explicit instructions that no member of the Claver family is ever permitted on this property. Understood. He's asking if he can leave a message or letter. Tell him everything he might want to say to me has already been said. He made his position clear years ago. I have nothing to add to that conversation. She watched through the security camera feed on her phone as Harlan delivered the message. Jake stood at the gate wearing jeans and a simple shirt, looking smaller somehow than he had in her memories. He said something to Harlan she couldn't hear, then stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the gate as though he could will it to open through sheer desperate need. Finally, he walked back to his car and drove away. "You okay?" Celeste asked quietly, having moved Rue back to her butterfly hunt. "I don't know what I am." Brianna sat down heavily on the patio chair, her legs suddenly unsteady. "I thought seeing him again would feel like victory, like proof that I won and he lost. But it just feels empty. Closure doesn't always arrive wearing the outfit we imagined." Over the next week, Jake returned to her gate 6 more times. Each time, Harlan sent him away with the same message. Each time, Brianna watched from her security cameras, studying the man who had shouted at her to leave his family's home, searching for signs of genuine remorse or simply the performance of a man who had finally realized what he had discarded. On the 7th attempt, he brought flowers, not roses or anything expensive, but wild flowers that looked like he had picked them himself from the roadside. He handed them to Harlan with instructions to give them to Brianna, then left without arguing, when Harlan reiterated that she wasn't accepting gifts or communications from the Claver family. Harlan brought the flowers to her door with an apologetic expression. He said to tell you they reminded him of the ones you used to grow on your windowsill when you lived in that apartment across from the college. "I'm sorry, I know you said no communications, but he asked me to deliver his words exactly." Brianna took the flowers with hands that shook. She had grown wildflowers in her college apartment, before Jake, before everything. She had filled every available surface with pots of lavender and black-eyed Susans and coneflowers because they made her think of her mother, who had never owned nice things but had always kept flowers alive in their small house. Jake remembering that detail meant he had been paying attention during a time when she still believed attention implied actual care. "Want me to throw them away?" Harlan asked gently. "No. Yes, I don't know." Brianna held the flowers against her chest, hating that they mattered, hating that some part of her still responded to gestures from a man who had proven himself unworthy of her response. "Put them in water." "But not where Rue can see them. Not where I have to look at them constantly." That night, after Rue was asleep and Celeste had retired to her room, Brianna stood in her home office surrounded by evidence of everything she had built from the ashes of what the Clavers had tried to burn. Awards for her podcast work, framed letters from people whose lives had been changed by hearing their own experiences validated through her storytelling. Photographs of Rue at various stages of development, each one a reminder of what Jake had missed while she built this life alone. She had won. By every measure that mattered, she had won. So why did victory taste like grief? Her phone buzzed with a message from Tate, interview request from major network for profile piece on you and Rue. They want to film at your home, show the life you built. Thoughts? Brianna looked around her office, then typed back, "No, Rue doesn't appear in any media. My daughter isn't part of the narrative I'm building. She's the reason I'm building it, but she deserves privacy until she's old enough to choose her own level of visibility." Understood. For what it's worth, you're making the right call. Kids shouldn't pay for their parents' wars. But Rue was already paying, Brianna realized. She was growing up without a father because Brianna had chosen to wage this particular war in this particular way. Jake wanted to meet his daughter, wanted to apologize, wanted some form of redemption that Brianna held the power to either grant or withhold. Was she protecting Rue by keeping Jake away? Or was she punishing him by using their daughter as the ultimate consequence of his cowardice? The question kept her awake most of the night, turning over possibilities like stones to see what lived underneath. The next morning, Whitley Claver appeared at the gate, accompanied by Loretta and Donovan. They carried gift bags from expensive stores. War expressions Brianna assumed they practiced in mirrors, and requested through Harlan that they just wanted 5 minutes to apologize properly for past behavior that they now recognized as hurtful. Brianna watched them on her security feed, noting how they positioned themselves to look humble while still maintaining the posture of people accustomed to getting what they wanted through sheer insistence. "What should I tell them?" Harlan asked over the intercom. Brianna could open the gate. She could let them grovel, accept their manufactured apologies, and negotiate some arrangement that would give Jake access to Rue while keeping the rest of his toxic family at a safe distance. She could be gracious in victory, magnanimous in her success, or she could do what they had done to her, dismiss them as fundamentally unworthy of her time and attention. Tell them their apologies are declined. Tell them their gifts are not accepted. Tell them they need to leave my property immediately, or you'll contact local police for trespassing. She watched Loretta's face transform from practiced humility to genuine shock. Watched Whitley's composure crack, revealing the entitled fury underneath. Watched Donovan's jaw tighten as he realized that for perhaps the first time in his life, someone was saying no to him and meaning it. They left, but not before someone in the neighborhood captured cell phone video of Loretta crying at Brianna's gate, and somehow that footage found its way to social media with commentary about karma and consequences that went viral within hours. Brianna felt no satisfaction watching the video spread. She felt only the heavy weight of understanding that she had become exactly what she needed to become to survive what they had done to her. And that necessary transformation had required her to build walls so high that even genuine apologies couldn't scale them. Rue climbed into her lap that evening, smelling like the lavender soap Celeste used for bath time, and asked, "Mama, why were those people crying outside?" "Sometimes people feel sad when they realize they hurt someone and can't fix it," Brianna answered carefully. "Like when I braked your favorite mug and you said sorry doesn't always make things better." "Exactly like that, baby. But you forgive me anyway because you love me more than mugs." Brianna held her daughter tighter, recognizing wisdom in childish simplicity that adult complexity had forgotten. Rue was right. Forgiveness happened when love exceeded damage, when the relationship mattered more than the hurt. But what happened when the relationship itself was the source of damage? What happened when the hurt ran so deep that love couldn't find the bottom of it? Those were questions Brianna didn't have answers for yet, so she simply held her daughter and hoped that someday, when Rue was old enough to understand the choices her mother made, she would recognize them as protection rather than punishment. Chapter 6. The Revelation. Congressional hearings began on a humid morning when Rue refused to eat her breakfast, and Brianna was already running late for a meeting with her legal team. "Sweetheart, just 3 bites of egg," Brianna negotiated, knowing she was losing but trying anyway. "Eggs are slimy and wrong," Rue declared with the absolute certainty of someone who had recently learned to have opinions and intended to exercise that power at every opportunity. Celeste rescued them both by producing string cheese and apple slices, food Rue deemed acceptable according to her evolving and unpredictable standards. Brianna kissed her daughter's forehead and left for a meeting that would determine how much further she was willing to push her exposure of the Claver empire. The legal team represented families who were preparing to file class action lawsuits against Claver Pharmaceuticals for aggressive marketing practices that had contributed to widespread addiction. They wanted Brianna's testimony, her documentation, her willingness to stand in front of cameras and connect the corporate malfeasance to the human cost. "You've already done so much," Simone said. The former Claver family attorney had become Brianna's closest advisor, someone who understood the machinery from inside and had kept detailed records of everything she had witnessed before being forced into early retirement for asking uncomfortable questions. You've exposed their patterns, damaged their reputation, and created space for accountability. You don't owe anyone more than you've already given. But I have more to give, Brianna said, looking at the folders spread across the conference table. Each one contained stories of lives destroyed by medications the Clavers knew were being overprescribed, but continued pushing because profit mattered more than safety. These families deserve someone who can explain how the system enabled this. Someone who saw it from inside. You weren't inside their pharmaceutical operation. You were Jake's girlfriend for a few years. The defense will tear apart your credibility by pointing out that you're motivated by personal revenge rather than genuine concern for victims. Let them try, Brianna felt the familiar steel settle into her spine. I'll testify that my personal experience with the Claver family taught me exactly how they view people outside their circle, as resources to be used and disposed of when no longer valuable. That perspective explains everything about how they approached marketing their medications. They never saw patients as human beings whose lives mattered. They saw market share and quarterly profits. The testimony was scheduled for a month away, giving Brianna time to prepare for questioning that would be designed to discredit everything she represented. Meanwhile, the Claver empire continued its public disintegration. Loretta appeared on morning shows, attempting to control the narrative, but each appearance made things worse. She claimed Brianna was a disturbed woman seeking money, despite Brianna never filing for child support or requesting any financial settlement. She insisted their family had always acted with integrity, despite mounting evidence of sealed lawsuits and non-disclosure agreements spanning decades. She positioned herself as the victim of a vindictive campaign, apparently unaware that playing victim required actual powerlessness rather than just wounded privilege. Whitley entered rehab after developing an anxiety medication dependency that carried grim irony given their family business. The tabloids covered it with the gleeful cruelty reserved for those whose falls from grace feel especially deserved. Donovan faced personal bankruptcy after legal fees from multiple lawsuits exceeded his personal assets. The man who had dismissed Brianna as entertainment now discovered what it felt like to watch your carefully constructed life crumble while people observed with detached interest. And Jake stopped appearing at Brianna's gate because his therapist had finally convinced him that showing up uninvited was harassment regardless of intention. But he still wrote letters that Celeste accepted from the courier and stored unopened in a box labeled, "Someday Maybe." "You should read them," Celeste said one evening while they prepared dinner together. Rue was building elaborate block towers in the living room, narrating a story about princesses who rescued themselves without needing princes. Not for his benefit, for yours. So you know what he's saying instead of imagining it's either better or worse than reality. What if reading them changes something? Brianna chopped vegetables with more force than necessary. What if he says exactly the right things and I can't maintain the boundaries I've built? Then you discover you're more human than Fortress. That's not weakness. That's just truth. Brianna opened the first letter after Rue was asleep. Sitting in her bedroom with a glass of wine she didn't drink and a box of tissues she knew she'd need. Jake's handwriting looked shakier than she remembered, as though his hands had forgotten steadiness. "Brianna," the letter began, "I know I have no right to contact you. I know you've built walls that are justified by everything I did and failed to do, but I'm writing anyway because our daughter deserves a father, even if I don't deserve her. I've spent the last year in therapy trying to understand how I became someone who could shout at the woman he loved to get out of his life. The answer is complicated and unforgivable, but I want you to know I've been working to become different. Not for you because I know that's gone, but for Rue because she didn't ask to be born from my cowardice and your strength. If there's any possibility you might let me meet her someday, under whatever terms you set, I'll spend the rest of my life earning that privilege. If not, I understand, But I needed you to know that I see you now in ways I was too weak to see you then. You were never entertainment. You were everything that mattered, and I traded everything for nothing." Brianna read the letter 3 times, searching for manipulation or performance, finding only exhaustion and regret that sounded genuine precisely because it asked for nothing and promised everything would remain on her terms. She opened the second letter, then the third, then all of them, watching Jake's evolution through his words. He wrote about quitting the family business, about volunteering at a community center where nobody cared about his last name, about confronting Loretta and choosing Brianna's truth over his family's denial. He wrote about watching Rue from his car, seeing his own eyes in her face, understanding what he had sacrificed to maintain approval from people who valued control more than connection. The letters didn't change her anger. They didn't erase what he had done, but they complicated it in ways that made the clean narrative of victim and villain harder to maintain. "He wants to meet her," Brianna told Celeste the next morning. "Not alone, not unsupervised, just in some therapeutic setting where she can know she has a father who failed her mother but doesn't want to fail her." "What do you want?" Celeste asked, always cutting straight to the question that mattered most. "I want her to grow up whole. I want her to never wonder if she was unwanted. I want her to know her father's absence wasn't her fault." Brianna paused, the rest of the truth harder to admit. "And maybe I want to stop carrying all of this alone. Maybe I want Jake to understand what it costs to raise the child he threw away. Maybe that's revenge too, making him watch what he's missing. I don't know anymore." Congressional Testimony Day arrived, wearing humidity that made breathing feel like work. Brianna wore a simple navy suit and her mother's pearl earrings, the only jewelry Geneva had owned that qualified as nice. She sat in the waiting area outside the hearing room while Simone reviewed key points and Tate adjusted the microphone he'd use to record everything for a special podcast episode. "Remember," Simone said, "they're going to try to make this about your relationship with Jake instead of about the medication crisis. Don't let them redirect the focus. This is about patterns of corporate behavior, not personal grievances." "But my personal grievance is part of the pattern," Brianna countered. "They treated me as disposable the same way they treated patients as disposable. The connection matters. Then make that connection explicit. Own it. Use it." The hearing room felt smaller than it looked on television, more intimate in its exposure. Brianna took her seat at the witness table, raised her right hand, swore to tell the truth, and felt her mother's presence like a hand on her shoulder, whispering that speaking truth was the most sacred work anyone could do. The questions started gently, establishing her background and relationship with the Claver family, then sharpened into attacks designed to discredit her testimony before she could deliver it. "Ms. Scurry, isn't it true that you never worked for Claver Pharmaceuticals and therefore have no direct knowledge of their practices?" "I never worked for them, but I was intimate with someone who did. I heard conversations about marketing strategies and sales, quotas and lawsuit settlements that the family never imagined I'd remember or repeat. Isn't it also true that you're currently promoting a podcast that profits from exposing the Claver family? Don't you have financial motivation to exaggerate or fabricate allegations?" "I started that podcast before it generated any revenue because I needed to tell my story. The fact that people responded and supported that work doesn't make the truth less true. It means other people recognize the patterns I was describing from their own experiences. And isn't it true that you have a child with Jake Claver, but chose not to inform him of the pregnancy, effectively weaponizing his daughter as part of your revenge campaign?" Brianna felt the question land like a blow to her chest, designed to paint her as vindictive rather than protective. She looked at the congressman who had asked it, saw the rehearsed expression of concern, masking satisfaction at having landed a hit, and made a choice about what truth to tell. "When Jake Claver shouted at me to get out of his family's home in front of 15 relatives who agreed I was unworthy of their consideration, I was 12 weeks pregnant. I hadn't told him yet because I wanted privacy for that conversation. After that night, I chose to raise my daughter alone rather than force her into a family that had already demonstrated how they treat people they consider beneath them. That wasn't revenge. That was protection. The room went silent in that way that meant something had shifted, some narrative had been disrupted. Some truth had been spoken that couldn't be easily dismissed or explained away. Brianna continued testifying for 3 hours, providing documentation and connecting patterns, explaining how the family's treatment of her reflected the same mindset that allowed them to treat patients as revenue sources rather than vulnerable human beings trusting medical advice. When she finally left the hearing room, Tate was waiting with an expression she couldn't quite read. "That was remarkable," he said. "But you just told the entire world that Jake has a daughter he's never met. That's going to complicate everything." "Good," Brianna said, feeling exhausted and exhilarated simultaneously. "Let it be complicated. Complicated is honest. I'm done with simple narratives that protect people who don't deserve protection." Her phone started buzzing before she reached her car. News alerts flooding in about her testimony, about the revelation that Jake Claver had a daughter, about questions regarding his parental rights and responsibilities. Somewhere across the city, Jake was likely discovering that the secret Brianna had kept was now public knowledge, and that his daughter existed in the world with his eyes and Brianna's, determination and a name he had never heard but would spend the rest of his life trying to earn the right to speak. Chapter 7. The Siege the Media Discovered. Rooks's name within 72 hours. Because privacy was a commodity money could buy, and journalists knew how to spend. Brianna stood in her kitchen, reading headlines about secret Claver, heir and pharmaceutical princess hidden from dynasty, while Rue sat at the table creating artwork that involved significantly more glitter than any surface should reasonably contain. Celeste had gone to the store, leaving Brianna alone to manage the flood of interview requests and legal communications, and messages from people she hadn't spoken to in years suddenly interested in her life now that it had become entertainment. "Mama, is this pretty?" Rue held up a paper covered in purple and gold sparkles, arranged in no particular pattern, but created with absolute conviction that beauty had been achieved. "It's the prettiest thing I've ever seen," Brianna said honestly, because in a world that had become complicated beyond recognition, her daughter's joy in messy art remained uncomplicated and true. Her phone rang with an unknown number. She almost declined, but something made her answer. "Mr. Scurry, this is Grayson Hall from Hall & Associates. We represent Jake Claver regarding matters of paternity and parental rights. Mr. Claver would like to discuss establishing a custody arrangement and meeting his daughter through proper legal channels since informal outreach has been declined." Brianna felt her blood turn to ice. "He wants custody. He wants the opportunity to be a father. We're proposing mediation to establish terms that prioritize the child's well-being while acknowledging his parental rights." "His parental rights?" Brianna's voice rose, despite her attempt to stay calm. "He screamed at me to get out when I was pregnant. He never once tried to verify if that pregnancy existed. He abandoned us completely. And now that the whole world knows, suddenly he wants rights? Mr. Scurry, I understand your anger, but legally, Mr. Claver has standing to pursue a relationship with his biological child. We can do this cooperatively through mediation, or we can do it through family court, where a judge will make decisions neither of you might prefer. He's hoping you'll choose cooperation." After she hung up, Brianna stood motionless in her kitchen, while Rue hummed and created art, oblivious to the fact that her existence had become a legal negotiation between two people who had loved each other once and destroyed that love so completely that now they had to hire professionals to manage conversations about their daughter. Celeste returned, to find Brianna staring at nothing with an expression that communicated. "Emergency without words. What happened?" Celeste asked, immediately moving Rue to the living room with snacks and cartoons before returning for details. Jake's lawyer called. He wants mediation about custody. He wants to meet Rue through legal channels, since I keep refusing him informally. And he's right, he does have legal standing. I can fight it, but a judge might order access anyway. I've been so focused on keeping him away that I forgot he actually has rights, regardless of how badly he used them. So you mediate. Celeste sat down across from Brianna. You establish terms that protect Rue. You control the narrative and the environment and the pace. This isn't surrender. This is you deciding how it happens, instead of letting courts decide for you. Brianna knew Celeste was right, but admitting it felt like losing something she couldn't quite name. She had built her life around the story of being abandoned and surviving anyway, of being strong enough to do everything alone. Letting Jake into that life meant complicating that clean narrative, meant acknowledging that maybe Rue deserved the chance to know her father, even if her mother hadn't forgiven him. The Claver family, meanwhile, faced their own siege. Public opinion had turned from skeptical to actively hostile after Brianna's congressional testimony. Organizations that had previously accepted Claver donations now returned them with public statements about ethical alignment. Hospital systems that had relied on their medications for decades began reviewing contracts and seeking alternative suppliers. The pharmaceutical company lost 30% of its market value in a week. Loretta stopped appearing on television after a disastrous interview where she suggested that Brianna had trapped Jake with a pregnancy, apparently forgetting that Jake had never known about the pregnancy until Brianna revealed it publicly years later. The clip went viral with commentary about how wealth didn't purchase self-awareness or basic logic. Constance suffered a stroke brought on by stress and public humiliation, spending a week hospitalized while her family scrambled to manage both her health crisis and their public relations catastrophe. She survived, but emerged frailer, her authority diminished by the reminder that even dynasty matriarchs were subject to mortality and consequence. Pierce lost his position at a prestigious law firm after they determined his family connection had become a liability that outweighed his legal skills. He made the mistake of complaining about it publicly, sparking conversations about how mediocre men from powerful families occupied positions they hadn't earned and lost them only when their family names stopped opening doors. And Jake stopped sleeping. He lay awake knowing his daughter existed somewhere in the city, that she went to bed each night without any idea she had a father who thought about her constantly, that Brianna had built an entire life around Rue, while he had built nothing except regret and therapy bills and a desperate need for redemption he didn't deserve. His therapist asked if he was angry at Brianna for keeping Rue's secret. No, Jake answered honestly. I'm angry at myself for creating a situation where keeping her secret was the safest choice. I'm angry that my family taught me wealth was more valuable than love. I'm angry that I believed them. And what are you going to do with that anger? Whatever Brianna lets me do. Whatever Rue needs, whatever it takes to prove I'm not who I was that night. The mediation was scheduled at a neutral facility specializing in high-conflict family situations. Brianna arrived, with Simone as her legal advisor and Celeste as moral support. Jake arrived alone, having declined to bring his lawyer after requesting that the session focus on conversation rather than legal positioning. He looked thinner than Brianna remembered, exhausted in ways that went deeper than lack of sleep. Wearing an old sweater she recognized from their time together that he had probably kept, not because it was nice, but because it reminded him of when things were simpler. The mediator, a woman named Ruth who specialized in reuniting fractured families, established ground rules with the gentle authority of someone accustomed to managing volatile emotions in confined spaces. We're here to discuss what's best for Rue, Ruth said. Not what either of you deserves or doesn't deserve. Not what happened 3 years ago, not who's more right or more wronged. Just what serves your daughter's well-being. Jake spoke first, his voice carrying the weight of everything he'd been holding. I know I don't deserve this. I know I abandoned Brianna when she needed me most. I know my family is responsible for damage that extends far beyond our personal situation. But Rue didn't do anything wrong. She didn't ask to be born from my failure. And she deserves the option of knowing her father, even if that father has to spend years proving himself worthy of knowing her. Brianna listened without interrupting, watching Jake struggle through the words, seeing genuine remorse that looked nothing like the performances his family had attempted at her gate. Then it was her turn. You shouted at me to get out in front of 15 people who agreed I was disposable. You chose your inheritance over our child before you even knew she existed. You made me feel like loving you was the biggest mistake of my life. She paused, gathering the rest of the truth that was harder to admit. But Rue asks about her father. She creates stories where daddies exist and love their daughters. She wonders why hers is missing. And I can tell her you're a coward who chose comfort over courage. Or I can give her the chance to discover who you actually are through supervised contact that protects her from your family and your past mistakes. I'll agree to anything, Jake said immediately. Supervised visits in therapeutic settings, background checks, parenting classes, limited contact with no other Claver family members. Whatever you need to feel safe. I need to know this isn't about your guilt or your redemption. I need to know you're doing this for her, not for yourself. I'm doing it because she exists, and I helped create her, and I owe her the chance to decide for herself if I'm worth knowing. That's not about me. That's about her right to have information and contact and the possibility of a relationship if she chooses it when she's old enough to choose. They spent 2 hours negotiating specific terms, supervised visits at a child therapy office, with a professional present to observe interactions and assess emotional safety. Jake would complete parenting classes and continue therapy to address the family dynamics that had shaped his previous failures. Contact would begin slowly, building gradually based on Rue's comfort level and Brianna's assessment of whether Jake was genuinely changing or just performing change. Most importantly, Rue would not meet or have any contact with other Claver family members until she was old enough to understand what they represented and make informed choices about those relationships. When? Jake asked as they prepared to leave. When can I meet her? Brianna looked at him for a long moment. This man who had destroyed her and given her Rue simultaneously. This person who represented both her greatest pain and her greatest joy. 2 weeks. We'll schedule the first session. And Jake? She waited until he met her eyes fully. If you hurt her, if you make her feel even a fraction of what you made me feel, I will destroy what's left of your family so completely that your name will become a cautionary tale. Do you understand? I understand, he said. And Brianna, thank you for giving me this chance. I know I don't deserve it. You're right, she said. You don't, but maybe Rue deserves it. That's the only reason this is happening. She left the mediation facility and drove home to her daughter, who was waiting with Celeste and 1,000 questions about where Mama had been and why she looked sad. I'm not sad, baby, Brianna lied, then corrected herself because she had promised never to lie to Rue. Actually, I am a little sad. But sometimes sad and right happen together. Sometimes you do hard things because they're the right things, even when they hurt. Like when you make me eat vegetables? Rue asked seriously. Exactly like that, Brianna said, and held her daughter close, memorizing this moment before everything changed. In 2 weeks, Rue would meet her father for the first time. In 2 weeks, the clean story of survival would become complicated by the messy reality of forgiveness and boundaries and learning to exist in proximity to people who had wounded you while protecting the innocent person caught between the hurt and the healing. Brianna had built her empire on being strong enough to stand alone. Now she would have to learn something harder, being strong enough to let someone back in without letting them destroy what she had built. Chapter 8. The Empire Crumbles. The video surfaced on a Tuesday afternoon while Brianna was teaching Rue how to braid friendship bracelets using yarn and patience, neither of them possessed in sufficient quantities. Someone had filmed the claver. Families attempted apology at Brianna's gate, capturing Loretta's tears and Whitley's frustration and Donovan's barely contained rage when they were turned away. The footage was grainy, shot from a neighbor's phone at an awkward angle, but clear enough to show 3 people accustomed to access, being denied entry by a security guard who remained unmoved by their pleading. The caption read, "When privilege finally meets consequences." Within hours, the video had been viewed millions of times, spawning countless reaction videos and think pieces about wealth and accountability and the satisfaction people felt watching the powerful experience powerlessness. Brianna hadn't released the footage. She had nothing to do with its spread, but she also felt no obligation to defend the Clavers from their own humiliation. "They look sad," Rue observed from her position on the floor, tangled in yarn that had somehow wrapped around both her wrists and one ankle. "Why are they sad, Mama?" Because they wanted something they couldn't have," Brianna answered, untangling her daughter with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned that children were tiny chaos machines requiring constant supervision. "Like when I wanted ice cream for breakfast and you said no." Similar, but more complicated. Sometimes adults want things they gave up the right to have by how they treated people. That's dumb. They should just be nice always, so they can have what they want. "You're absolutely right, baby. If adults listened to children more often, the world would be much simpler." Congressional hearings continued without Brianna's presence, but her testimony had opened floodgates. 3 separate class action lawsuits were filed against Claver Pharmaceuticals by families whose loved ones had struggled with addiction to medications the company had marketed as safer than evidence supported. Internal documents were subpoenaed, showing executives discussing sales quotas and minimizing safety concerns that researchers had raised early in development. The company faced criminal investigation by federal prosecutors, examining whether they had knowingly misled medical providers and patients about addiction risks. Their stock became essentially worthless as investors fled toward pharmaceutical companies without pending criminal charges. The Clavers Charitable Foundation was audited by the IRS after reporters uncovered financial irregularities, suggesting it existed primarily for tax avoidance, rather than genuine philanthropy. Donations that had purchased naming rights and social standing were systematically returned by organizations desperate to distance themselves from scandal. The family's social position evaporated with remarkable speed. Clubs they had belonged to for generations quietly suggested their membership had lapsed. Galas they had hosted for decades found new sponsors. Friends who had been loyal when the name Claver opened doors suddenly discovered previous commitments whenever Loretta called. Whitley emerged from rehab to discover she had no life to return to. Her engagement had been terminated. Her position on various charity boards had been eliminated. Her trust fund had been frozen pending resolution of lawsuits that threatened to bankrupt the family. She moved into a modest apartment and got a job as an assistant at an interior design firm, learning for the first time what it meant to earn rather than inherit. Donovan's bankruptcy proceedings revealed that he had been living beyond his actual income for years, relying on family money and the assumption of future inheritance to maintain appearances. He moved in with Loretta at the estate, which was now on the market because even that symbol of dynasty had to be sacrificed to cover legal fees and settlement costs. And Jake stopped attending family gatherings entirely because listening to Loretta and Donovan strategize about legal defenses while refusing to acknowledge any actual wrongdoing made him physically ill. He spent his time volunteering at a community center in a neighborhood where the Claver name meant nothing, where kids needed homework help and encouragement more than they needed a pharmaceutical heir's guilty conscience. He was terrible at it initially, awkward around children and unused to being the person offering help instead of funding it from a distance. But he kept showing up, kept trying, kept learning that genuine contribution required presence rather than checks written to ease guilt without addressing cause. "You any good at math?" a girl asked him one afternoon, sliding a textbook across the table with the expression of someone convinced the answer would be no. "Depends on the math," Jake said honestly. "What are you working on?" "Fractions. They're stupid and I hate them." "I also think fractions are stupid and hate them," Jake agreed. "But we're both stuck with them, so let's figure it out together." They worked through the problems side by side, Jake relearning concepts he hadn't thought about since his own schooling. The girl gradually becoming less hostile as she realized he wasn't going to make her feel dumb for not understanding immediately. "Thanks," she said when they finished. "You're not completely useless. That's the nicest thing anyone said to me in months," Jake told her, meaning it completely. The first scheduled visit with Rue arrived wearing unseasonably cold weather that matched Brianna's emotional temperature. She had prepared Rue as carefully as possible, explaining that they would meet someone who was very important, someone who loved her already, even though they had never met. Someone who made mistakes but wanted to do better. "Is it my papa?" Rue asked with the directness of children who cut straight through adult attempts at gentle preparation. "Yes," Brianna said, deciding honesty mattered more than controlling the narrative. "It's your papa. He wants to meet you very much. Does he like glitter?" "I don't know, baby." "You can ask him." The therapy office was designed to feel non-threatening, with soft furniture and toys, strategically placed and lighting that tried hard to seem natural despite being entirely artificial. The therapist, a woman named Dr. Lin, who specialized in family reunification, greeted them with the calm professionalism of someone accustomed to managing emotionally complex situations. "Rue, I'm Dr. Lin. Your mama has told me lots of wonderful things about you. Today you're going to meet your papa for the first time. You can play, you can talk, or you can just sit quietly. There's no right or wrong way to do this. We're just spending time together so everyone can start knowing each other." "Okay," Rue said agreeably, then returned her attention to the dollhouse in the corner that had apparently captivated her completely. Jake entered moments later, looking like he might physically collapse from anxiety. He saw Rue first, a small person with dark curls, and his own hazel eyes and Brianna's determined chin and an expression of concentration as she arranged tiny furniture with exacting precision, and his face crumbled with every emotion he had been holding since that winter night. "That's her," he whispered to Brianna, stating the obvious because words had abandoned sophistication in favor of simple truth. "That's her," Brianna confirmed. Dr. Lin facilitated introductions with gentle guidance, explaining to Rue that this was her Papa Jake, that he was excited to meet her, that they would spend some time together while Mama stayed nearby in the waiting room. "Hi, Papa," Rue said, with the casual comfort of someone who had been calling him that in her imagination for long enough that saying it out loud required no adjustment. "Do you like my hair? Celeste did braids today." "Your hair is beautiful," Jake managed, his voice breaking around the words. "Everything about you is beautiful." "I know. Mama says I'm perfect, just how I am." She returned her attention to the dollhouse. "Do you want to play?" They played together for an hour while Dr. Lin observed, and Brianna sat in the waiting room vibrating with anxiety she tried to mask by reading a magazine she processed no words from. She imagined every possible disaster. Rue asking why he had never visited before, Jake overwhelming her, Daughter with too much emotion too fast, their meeting becoming traumatic instead of healing. But when Dr. Lin called her back in, Rue was sitting on Jake's lap, showing him her latest artistic creation, another glitter-covered masterpiece that defied conventional aesthetics while achieving its own unique beauty. And Jake was listening with the intensity of someone memorizing scripture. "Mama, Papa likes glitter," Rue announced triumphantly. "He said it makes everything better." "I'm learning that glitter has many valuable applications I previously underestimated," Jake said to Brianna, his eyes red from crying but his expression more peaceful than she had seen it in years. They scheduled another visit for the following week, then another. Gradually, the sessions extended from 1 hour to 2, from Jake and Rue alone with Dr. Lin to Jake and Rue with Celeste, present as familiar support. Rue began asking when she would see Papa next, began making him artwork to save for their visits, began incorporating him into the family narrative she created through play. And Brianna watched her daughter bond with the man who had destroyed her, feeling emotions she couldn't name. Relief that Rue was getting what she deserved, grief over what they had all lost, fear that Jake would disappoint their daughter the way he had disappointed her, hope that maybe people could actually change when given sufficient reason and opportunity. "He's good with her," Celeste observed after one session. "I was skeptical, but he genuinely shows up just for her. He's not performing, he's present." "I know," Brianna said. "That's what scares me. It's easier to keep him at a distance when he's the villain. But watching him be gentle with Rue makes him human again, and humans are complicated in ways villains aren't." The Claver estate sold for significantly less than its appraised value because houses that symbolized dynasty held less appeal when the dynasty was associated with scandal. Loretta moved into a condominium that was perfectly nice by normal standards, but represented humiliation by hers. She stopped giving interviews. She stopped appearing publicly. She spent her days in self-imposed isolation, unable to comprehend how speaking truth had somehow become more powerful than maintaining carefully constructed lies. The pharmaceutical company was sold to competitors who immediately rebranded everything to eliminate the Claver Association. The name that had represented 3 generations of wealth and influence became something companies paid money to escape rather than acquire. Constance died quietly in her sleep, her final days spent watching her family's empire dismantle itself. Her obituary noted her philanthropic contributions, without mentioning the business practices that had funded that philanthropy or the human cost of maintaining her legacy. Jake attended his grandmother's funeral alone, none of his family able to face the public attention their presence would attract. He stood at her graveside thinking about how she had taught him that legacy mattered more than love. That family. Reputation was worth protecting through cruelty if necessary, that some people were simply worth more than others based on circumstances of birth rather than quality of character. He had believed her for too long. Now he spent his weekends playing with his daughter, learning that the only legacy that actually mattered was whether the people you loved felt loved, and whether you could transform from who you were into who you needed to be for them. After one visit, while Rue was being escorted to the restroom by Celeste, Jake said to Brianna, "I know I can't fix what I broke. I know sorry is just a word that doesn't undo harm, but I need you to know I see you now. I see what you built from what we destroyed. I see how you've protected Rue from my family and from me until I could prove I was safe. I see your strength, and it's extraordinary." "Don't," Brianna said quietly. "Don't make this about me and you. This is about Rue, only about her. I know. You're right. I just needed to say it once, that I see you, that I'm sorry, that you deserved so much better than what I gave you." "Yes," Brianna agreed. "I did deserve better, but I got Rue instead, and she's worth every moment of suffering it took to bring her here. So maybe it worked out the way it was supposed to, even if it was terrible getting here. They sat in awkward silence until Rue returned. And then everything shifted back to the easier dynamic of parents focused on their child, rather than the wreckage between them that could never be fully repaired, only carefully navigated around like permanent damage in a structure that had to keep standing because innocent people lived inside it. Chapter 9. The Truth Costs. Jake's mental health began deteriorating so gradually that he didn't notice until he found himself unable to get out of bed on a morning when he was supposed to see Rue. Celeste called when he failed to arrive at the scheduled time, her voice carrying concern rather than judgment. "Jake, are you okay? Rue has been watching the door for 20 minutes. The guilt of disappointing his daughter hit him like physical violence. He forced himself upright, threw on clothes that didn't match, and drove to the therapy office with hands that shook on the steering wheel. He arrived 40 minutes late, disheveled and clearly unwell, to find Rue playing quietly while trying not to cry, and Brianna looking at him with an expression he couldn't interpret. "I'm sorry," he said to his daughter first. "Papa wasn't feeling well this morning, but that's not an excuse for being late. You deserved better." "Are you sick?" Rue asked, her small face serious with worry that children shouldn't have to feel about their parents. "A different kind of sick, baby. Sometimes grown-ups' brains get tired in ways that make it hard to do normal things. But I'm working on it with my doctor, and I promise I'll do better." Dr. Lin pulled him aside after the session, her professional demeanor sharpened by genuine concern. "Jake, I need to know if you're managing your mental health adequately. Rue needs consistency. If you're struggling, we need to adjust the visit schedule until you're stable." "No, please. Seeing her is the only thing keeping me functional. If I lose these visits, I'll completely fall apart." "That's precisely the problem." Dr. Lin's voice was gentle but firm. "You can't make your daughter responsible for your mental health. That's an unfair burden to place on a child. You need to stabilize yourself independently, then maintain that stability while parenting. Not use parenting as your only stabilizing force." Jake knew she was right, but accepting it meant confronting how deeply broken he had become. He had lost his family's approval, his position in their company, his social standing, and his sense of identity. The only thing tethering him to functionality was those scheduled hours, with a daughter who deserved a father who was whole, not fragments held together by desperate need. He increased his therapy sessions. He started medication his psychiatrist had been recommending for months that he had resisted because asking for help felt like admitting weakness. He joined a support group for people whose families had been publicly destroyed by their own actions, finding unexpected solidarity with others whose last names had become synonymous with shame. "My father embezzled from his company's pension fund," one man shared. "Hundreds of families lost their retirement. I had nothing to do with it. But I lost my job, my friends and my fiancé because nobody could separate me from his choices. My sister ran a charity that turned out to be fraud," a woman said. "She's in prison now. My children get bullied at school because kids Google our last name and find the news stories. I'm thinking about legally changing it, starting over with an identity that isn't contaminated." Jake listened to these stories and realized his suffering had company, that being collateral damage in someone else's catastrophe was its own particular kind of grief. But he also realized that unlike these people, he had participated in his family's patterns. He hadn't just been adjacent to wrongdoing, he had benefited from it, perpetuated it, chosen it, over choosing love. His awakening came too late to prevent the damage, but perhaps early enough to prevent repeating it. Brianna, meanwhile, was exhausted from carrying everything while maintaining the appearance that she had it all under control. The podcast required constant content creation and promotion. Speaking engagements demanded travel and emotional labor, of repeatedly telling her story to audiences who found it inspiring, but couldn't understand how tiring inspiration became when it was extracted from trauma. Legal proceedings related to the Claver lawsuits required her testimony and documentation and hours of preparation with lawyers who saw her as a resource rather than a person. And through it all, she was raising Rue, managing Jake's increasing fragility, supporting Celeste, who was dealing with her own family crisis, and trying to maintain some version of herself that existed independently of being the witness or Rue's mother or Jake's complicated co-parent. "I'm tired," she told Simone during a rare moment of honesty. "I'm so tired of being strong. I'm tired of making decisions that affect everyone else while nobody asks what I actually want. I'm tired of performing recovery when some days I still feel as broken as I did that winter night." "Then stop performing," Simone suggested. "Take a break. Hire more help. Say no to things. You've already done the hardest work. You exposed them. You protected Rue. You built something extraordinary. You don't owe anyone more than you've already given. But the families who are suing need my testimony. The journalists writing follow-up stories need my input. The survivors who contact me need to know their experiences matter. If I stop now, what was it all for? It was for you and Rue, that's enough. Anything beyond that is extra credit, not required curriculum." Brianna tried to internalize that wisdom, but found it incompatible with the woman she had become. She had built her identity around being unbreakable, around transforming pain into power, around refusing to let the Clavers diminish her significance. Admitting exhaustion felt like regression toward the powerless person they had tried to make her, but exhaustion was honest in ways power sometimes wasn't. Rue started having nightmares about Mama disappearing, waking up screaming for reassurance that Brianna hadn't left. Dr. Lin gently suggested that children absorbed adult stress even when adults tried to hide it, that Rue was responding to Brianna's invisible tension in the only way a child could, through anxiety that manifested as fear of abandonment. "You're there physically," Dr. Lin explained, "but she senses you're not fully present. She's too young to understand adult stress, so she interprets your distraction as the precursor to loss. You need to actually rest, not just pretend to rest while mentally managing everything else." Brianna started declining interview requests. She took a break from the podcast, releasing a brief statement that she needed time to focus on her family. She hired additional help to manage the daily logistics of their lives, so that when she was with Rue, she could be genuinely present instead of mentally cataloging the 17 other things requiring attention. The nightmares stopped. Rue began sleeping through the night again, and Brianna realized how much damage she had been causing by trying to be superhuman instead of simply being enough. Jake reached a crisis point on a rainy afternoon while volunteering. At the community center, the girl he had been helping with math homework mentioned, casually, that her father was in prison for something related to drugs, that she hadn't seen him in 3 years, that she missed him even though he had done bad things, because you could miss people and still understand they had hurt you. Jake excused himself and cried in the bathroom like he hadn't cried since that winter night, finally processing the full weight of what he had done. He had a daughter he had missed the first 3 years of knowing. He had destroyed a woman who had loved him genuinely instead of for his family name. He had participated in a system that valued profit over people, that protected the powerful while crushing the vulnerable, that treated addiction as a market opportunity rather than a public health crisis. He couldn't undo any of it. Apologies didn't resurrect lost time. Money didn't heal trauma. And becoming a better person now didn't erase who he had been then. But maybe if he kept showing up, kept trying, kept choosing differently when given chances to repeat old patterns, maybe eventually the weight would become bearable instead of crushing. He called his therapist from that bathroom, sitting on a closed toilet seat in a community center bathroom that smelled like industrial cleaner and desperation, and finally said the words he had been avoiding. "I don't know if I want to keep living this way. I don't know if the pain of becoming better is worth surviving." His therapist talked him through the crisis, helped him create a safety plan, and scheduled an emergency session for later that evening. Jake survived that moment, and the next one, and the one after that, stringing together minutes of continued existence until they accumulated into hours and days, and the particular crisis passed, even though the underlying grief remained. He told Brianna about it during their next co-parenting conversation, not because he wanted sympathy, but because Rue deserved to have a father who was honest about his struggles instead of hiding them until they exploded unexpectedly. "I'm not okay," he said simply. "I'm working on being okay. But I wanted you to know that I'm managing it responsibly, that I have professional support, and that Rue is never at risk when she's with me. I would never put her in danger just because I'm struggling." Brianna looked at him for a long time. This man who had wounded her so deeply that the scars had become permanent features of her emotional landscape. This person who was trying desperately to become someone worthy of the daughter they had created together. "Thank you for telling me," she said finally. "That took courage." "No, it didn't. Courage would have been choosing you that night. This is just the bare minimum of being honest when honesty matters." They sat together in the waiting room while Rue played with Dr. Lin, two people connected by their daughter and divided by their history, trying to figure out how to exist in proximity without either destroying what had been built or pretending the destruction had never happened. "Do you regret it?" Jake asked suddenly. "Meeting me, loving me, all of it? Would you choose differently if you could go back?" Brianna didn't answer immediately, thinking about all the ways that question was impossible to answer honestly. "I regret how it happened. I regret your family. I regret that winter night, and the months after when I went through labor alone and wondered if I would survive becoming a mother. But I don't regret Rue, so I can't regret the path that led to her, even though that path was terrible. Does that make sense?" "It makes perfect sense," Jake said. "And for what it's worth, I regret everything except her too. She's the only good thing that came from all of this." Then maybe we focus on that. Maybe we stop trying to reconcile the past and just work on giving her a present that doesn't require her to choose between her parents or carry our damage. "I can do that," Jake said. "I'm not sure what else I can do, but I can do that." Rue emerged from her session carrying a drawing she had made of their family. Mama, Papa, Celeste, and herself, all holding hands under a rainbow that defied meteorological possibility but achieved artistic truth. "This is us," she announced proudly. "We're different, but we're together." Brianna and Jake looked at the drawing, at their daughter's interpretation of a family that existed despite being fractured, and both thought separately about how children sometimes understood connection better than adults who had learned to protect themselves through disconnection. They were different, and they were together, and maybe that was enough for now, even if it wasn't everything they had once imagined family could mean. Chapter 10. The Earned Reconciliation. The mediation facility had become familiar territory, its neutral walls and carefully selected furniture no longer feeling clinical but simply present, like the necessary container for complicated conversations. Jake arrived before Brianna, pacing the parking lot with the nervous energy of someone who understood that this meeting would determine whether the fragile progress of the past months would continue or collapse under the weight of unresolved damage. When Brianna's car pulled in, he watched her gather her things with the practiced efficiency of someone managing too many responsibilities simultaneously. She looked tired in ways that made him ache with responsibility. He had contributed to that exhaustion, had added to her burdens when he should have been sharing them. Inside, the mediator Ruth greeted them with her usual calm professionalism. But there was something different in her expression today, an anticipation that suggested this session might move toward resolution rather than simply management. Brianna has requested this session to discuss expanding Jake's time with Rue and potentially allowing unsupervised visits, Ruth began. But before we address logistics, she wants to have a conversation. Jake, this is about listening, not defending or explaining. Can you do that? Yes, he said simply, settling into the chair across from Brianna and preparing himself for whatever she needed to say. Brianna took a breath, organizing thoughts she had been collecting for months. This isn't about forgiveness, Jake. I need you to understand that before we talk about anything else. I haven't forgiven you, and I might never completely forgive you. What you did that night, how your family treated me, the years I spent alone raising our daughter while you lived in comfort, those things don't disappear because you've been showing up for supervised visits and attending therapy. Jake nodded, keeping his expression neutral despite the pain her words caused, because she was right and he had no grounds to argue. Brianna continued, Rue asks about you constantly. She draws pictures of you. She saves her best stories to tell you at visits. She's starting to understand that families can look different, that having a papa who sees her twice a week is different from having one who lives with her. But that different doesn't mean wrong. And watching you with her, seeing how gentle you are, how present you try to be despite your own struggles, it's made me realize something I didn't want to accept. She paused, gathering the courage for what came next. You're not the same person who shouted at me that night. I don't know when the change happened or if it's permanent, but you're different enough that I can't keep treating you like you're still that man. Rue deserves a father who's actually part of her life, not just someone she sees in a therapist's office twice a week. And maybe I deserve to stop carrying all of this alone. Jake felt something crack open in his chest, hope and terror mixing in equal measure. What are you saying? I'm saying we schedule a meeting where you formally meet Rue as her father, where I tell her the whole truth about why you've been absent, where we explain that adults sometimes fail each other, but can still try to do better for the children they love. I'm saying we move toward unsupervised visits slowly, with clear boundaries that protect her. I'm saying I'm willing to let you be her father instead of just someone she visits. Brianna, His voice broke completely. I don't deserve this. You know I don't deserve this. You're right, you don't, but Rue deserves it. She deserves to know her father, and she deserves a mother who's not so exhausted from doing everything alone that she can't actually be present. This isn't about what you deserve. It's about what she needs, and what I need to survive this with my humanity intact. Ruth intervened gently. Brianna, have you thought about what Jake needs to demonstrate before you're comfortable with unsupervised time? Consistency, Brianna answered immediately. 6 more months of showing up exactly when you say you will, of prioritizing her needs over your own guilt, of managing your mental health independently instead of using her as your stability. 6 months of proving that the change isn't performance, but actual transformation. Can you do that? Yes, Jake said without hesitation. I can do that. I will do that. They spent the next hour negotiating specific terms with Ruth's guidance. Jake would continue therapy and maintain his volunteer work that had become grounding for him. He would complete additional parenting classes focused on managing children through transitions. He would provide regular updates about his mental health status and immediately notify Brianna if he experienced another crisis. Most importantly, he agreed that Rue would not meet other Claver family members until she was much older and could make informed decisions about those relationships if she chose to pursue them at all. Loretta, Whitley, and Donovan had forfeited their right to access through their cruelty, and Jake accepted that protecting his daughter from his family was part of earning her trust. One more thing, Brianna said as they prepared to leave. The first unsupervised visit happens at my home, where Rue feels safest. Celeste will be there. You don't get to take her somewhere unfamiliar until she's completely comfortable with you. Her security matters more than your convenience. Agreed. Completely agreed. After the session, they walked to the parking lot together. A silence between them that felt less hostile than usual. More like two people who had survived something terrible and were still figuring out how to exist afterward. Jake? Brianna stopped beside her car. Why did you finally choose differently? What changed? He thought about all the possible answers. Therapy, consequences, public humiliation, losing everything that had previously defined him. But the truth was simpler and more painful. I saw Rue's eyes and realized she had mine. I understood that she was real, not theoretical, and that every day I missed was gone forever. I understood that choosing my family's approval had cost me the only family that actually mattered. He paused, then added, "But mostly, I finally understood that you were telling the truth that night. About everything. About how my family treated people. About how I was complicit. About how love doesn't mean anything if it can't survive being tested. You were right, and I was wrong, and it took losing everything to see that clearly." Brianna nodded slowly, processing his words. "I built my entire life around surviving what you did to me. I turned that pain into something powerful, because I had to. But Jake, I'm tired of building from ruins. I'm tired of being defined by how strong I had to become. Maybe letting you actually be Rue's father means I can finally stop being a survivor and just be her mother." "I can't promise I won't make mistakes," Jake said. "I can't promise I'll always get it right. But I promise I'll keep showing up, keep trying, keep choosing her even when it's hard." "That's all anyone can promise," Brianna said. "The rest is just time and consistency, proving whether promises become action." 6 months passed in a rhythm of supervised visits that gradually extended, of Jake demonstrating through repeated presence that he could maintain stability independently, of Rue's confidence in her father growing from cautious hope to genuine affection. The first unsupervised visit happened on a Saturday afternoon at Brianna's home. Jake arrived with age-appropriate activities planned and backup activities for when the first ones inevitably failed because children were unpredictable. Celeste stayed nearby in case Rue needed familiar support, but she gave them space to develop their own dynamic. They made pancakes together, which went poorly in terms of actual pancake production, but excellently in terms of creating memories of laughter and flour everywhere, and Rue declaring that Papa was funny even when he was bad at cooking. Jake read her the books she selected, did the voices she requested, and listened to her elaborate commentary about each story as though she was revealing profound truths instead of just a child's observations. When it was time for him to leave, Ruth hugged him with the fierce confidence of someone who knew he would return because he had been returning consistently for months. "I love you." "Papa," she said simply, the words carrying the weight of trust earned through action rather than inherited through biology. "I love you too, sweetheart," Jake managed, his voice thick with everything he couldn't express to a child who deserved joy rather than adult complexity. "I'll see you next week." After he left, Brianna found Celeste in the kitchen with an expression that communicated satisfaction without words. "He's good with her," Celeste observed. "Really good. Not performing, not trying too hard, just present." "I know," Brianna said, feeling the complicated mix of relief and grief that accompanied watching Jake become the father he should have been from the beginning. "It doesn't fix what happened, but maybe it prevents it from defining what happens next." "That's growth," Celeste said. "Not redemption, but growth. And sometimes growth is enough." Brianna stood at her window watching Rue play in the backyard. This child who existed because of love and cowardice and survival and transformation. This daughter who deserved parents who could exist in proximity without their damage contaminating her innocence. She hadn't forgiven Jake, might never completely forgive him. The wound he had caused remained, would always remain. a permanent alteration of who she was and how she understood trust and vulnerability and love's limitations. But she had given him something arguably more valuable than forgiveness. She had given him a path forward that acknowledged the past without being imprisoned by it, that recognized damage without requiring it to define every future interaction, that allowed their daughter to have both parents without forcing Brianna to pretend the hurt had disappeared. Jake left Brianna's home knowing he hadn't earned forgiveness, hadn't repaired what he had destroyed, hadn't undone years of absence and harm. But he had been given an opportunity most people never received, the chance to demonstrate through consistent action that people could grow beyond their worst moments, that transformation was possible even after devastating failure, that being a father meant showing up repeatedly even when you didn't deserve the chance. Rue ran through the grass chasing butterflies, laughing with the unself-conscious joy of a child who knew she was loved by both parents in different ways, who was learning that family was complicated and that complication didn't negate connection. Above her, the sky stretched infinite and unconcerned, offering no judgment about whether this particular arrangement qualified as happy ending or simply realistic beginning, whether earning a place in his daughter's life constituted redemption or just the hard work of becoming worthy of what had been freely given at birth and subsequently forfeited through cowardice. Brianna watched her daughter play and felt something she hadn't expected to feel. Not happiness exactly, but something close to peace. The peace of understanding that she had protected what mattered most while still allowing grace alongside boundaries. That strength sometimes meant letting people prove they had changed rather than keeping them frozen as their worst selves. That Rue would grow up knowing both parents, even if those parents would never again be what they once were to each other. Some stories didn't end with fairy tale reunions. Some stories ended with two people who had wounded each other, learning to exist in the same space for the sake of the innocent person who deserved better than their damage, who deserved both of them trying desperately to be more than they had been, who deserved a family built on earned trust rather than inherited connection. This was that story. Imperfect, complicated, real, and maybe after everything exactly what survival looked like when people chose to keep trying instead of giving up on everyone, including themselves.